Hello my loves, and welcome back to this here little bookish corner of the internet. It's good to see you guys again. Not that I can actually see you guys, but since I saw you last, I've been a very busy bee, and I'm probably going to do a little life update video, so I won't bore you with all of that. But suffice to say, I've been on more than a few planes, done a lot of work, had some pretty significant shake-ups, and yeah, now I am settled here in Arizona. You guys recognize this background if you're long-term viewers. This is where my parents-in-law live, and when we landed back in LA a few days, well, I guess it was nearly 2 weeks ago now, it was about 45 degrees Celsius in our house since we don't have air conditioning, and so we didn't think it was safe to stay there, so we're hiding out in Arizona for a little bit. But that hopefully means that I can shoot a bunch of videos for you guys, and I'm excited for that. We were having a really fun time there for a while on the channel, and I wanted to say a massive thank you, because there are now over 1,000 of you, which is so exciting. It's a milestone that I've been waiting a while to reach, because God knows I'm inconsistent, so 100% my fault. But I love every single one of you. I love all the discussions we get into, and I love that you guys all come back and watch my videos. It feels great to have built some kind of a community and also be part of such a great community. So thank you to everyone who has chosen to click the little red subscribe button, and if you are new here and haven't done that yet, thank you for considering it, and it's nice to have you as part of this big bookish family. That being said, you guys, it's the summer, I'm super busy, I've been working really hard. Since March I've had this new job that's kind of a lot to handle, and reading has not been super great. And in the summer, for some reason, I find it hard to read. Going to London, and you'd think that I would read loads on planes. I don't. When I travel, I just find it hard to read. So in the spirit of that, and in the spirit of the fact that I haven't done great reading, and that there may be people who are really busy and having busy summers and also find it maybe difficult to read in the heat, I thought I would do today a little video about some short books that I've recently read and that I recommend. So if you're in the mood for something under 200 pages, which I believe that most of these books that I'm going to talk about are under 200 pages, then you might be able to pick one of these if you haven't read them yet. Any of you guys who've been with me for a while know that I loved Kang's The Vegetarian. In my first ever video, Vintage Bilingual Bookworm, I recommended that book wholeheartedly. I got some mixed feedback from members of my family who chose to pick up that book, but I know also a load of people that I respect who loved it too. And I have stayed a fan of Kang and also of Deborah Smith, who's her translator, ever since. And Philip got me for Christmas a signed copy of The White Book by Kang, which is her most recent, which is super exciting. Didn't ever think I'd have a signed copy, and it's very beautiful, and I want to talk to you about it today. It's a meditation on a couple of things: the colour white, and also on something that happened to Kang's family, which is that her older sister was born and died just a couple of hours after birth, and the impact that that has had on her family and on the generations that followed this baby that died is huge and wide-ranging. So we find Kang, I guess it's never quite clear that it's her, but it's almost definitely autobiographical. We find her in a lonely city. She's in Warsaw. She's decided to go and write there. She doesn't know it. She's a stranger in this huge place where she doesn't know anyone or anything, not even the language. And she begins the book by making a list of white things, things that aren't ostensibly linked to one another. But over time and over this tiny slight book, you understand the significance of each of these white things as things that are kind of in conversation about her sister's death, about the impact that that's had on her family, and about bigger themes like the fragility of human life and generational sadness and family and self-exploration and writing and creativity and grief and all these things that you guys know that I love reading about. So you hear about a white pebble, you hear about rice, you hear about breast milk, you hear about all these things that you might come across quite easily in your daily life and not attribute massive significance to, but suddenly with these very gentle words, this very deliberate poetry, that significance is there. And yeah, it is sad, but it's also just a tour de force, I think, in writing and in translation. It's easy to forget because Deborah Smith's translations are so good that you are reading Han Kang in translation, but I think this book particularly, and The Vegetarian too, but this book particularly, it speaks to the fact that they're a good team. Not only that Deborah Smith is an excellent translator, but clearly that she understands Han Kang, which is particularly interesting given that there was a massive controversy when The Vegetarian came out, because the Washington Post Korea gave the translation an awful review because, so to speak, Han Kang had used very deliberately sparse language, which then Deborah Smith had flowered up, added some adverbs and adjectives where they shouldn't be apparently, and that was pretty controversial, even though of course Han Kang had signed off on the translation and was happy with it. Personally, I think the translation is beautiful of this book and of The Vegetarian, and I kept thinking about this thing of multiple things being in conversation together and nothing existing in a vacuum, and that was what the story was, and that is also what the act of, you know, translating something that already exists in another language is. Deborah Smith seems to respect the power of words so much, and so does Han Kang. So if you're interested in that more meditative, less linear, maybe not a novel in the traditional sense, and maybe if you've read Han Kang before, I would strongly, strongly recommend. Also, if you like bluets and the red parts and stuff like that that are kind of meditative in nature, I would highly recommend. I loved it and I will definitely be rereading. Let's move on. The next book that I want to talk to you about, if you've seen the My Husband Buys My Books video that I did, Philip was getting after me that I probably would take years to read any of the books he got me. He was wrong, because I did read. I have read a few of them by now, but the one I want to talk to you about is Miss Ice Sandwich by, I've got the author down here, please hold, insert hold music here. Mieko Kawakami, Miss Ice Sandwich by Mieko Kawakami, and that is translated by Louise Kawai, which, what a cool name. In this, and this is a very tiny book, definitely under 200 pages, took me only a couple of hours to read, we follow an unnamed schoolboy who lives with his mother and his bedridden grandmother, and he's kind of living a boring life, and he is allowed to go many places on his own. It's not really clear how old he is, but he's probably early teenagehood. And he explores the kind of surrounding areas of his house, and he comes across a lady selling sandwiches. This lady is particularly amazing to him because she has these eyes that to him look very weird and like nothing he's ever seen before. But it's not just that she's weird in the sense that he's scared of her, he's also fascinated by her and becomes obsessed with her in a way. But that kind of obsession that teenagers can get, or young people can get, where they're almost too scared to speak to the person, and it's not necessarily a romantic obsession, but just an obsession with knowing who this person is and knowing what her story is and why she's selling sandwiches and what her voice sounds like, you know, basically what makes her up. And it's not the kind of obsession where you go and talk to the person, it's the kind of obsession where you think about that and only that, because that's the excitement in your life, and you kind of stand back and stare at this person without realizing how inappropriate that might be. It's translated from the Japanese, and if you've ever read any Japanese literature, you'll know that there's a kind of style to a lot of it. It's very spare, very sparse, not heavy on the description, and I could definitely feel that even in translation. I don't mind that, and I find it quite interesting in a way to read that, especially relative to a lot of English literary fiction, which is really heavy on the description. I can't say that this was particularly poetic. I was really intrigued by the story, and it wasn't like anything that I've ever read before, and in some parts it was really allegorical, and I think it did capture that kind of awkward teenage emotion of, you know, obsession with someone who's quite strange and a bit out of the ordinary to you. One thing that I really felt that it could have explored more is, at least to me, the way that I read it, is that Miss Ice Sandwich, which is a name clearly that the narrator has given this woman, that's not actually her name. Miss Ice Sandwich has, you know, some kind of bodily difference, some kind of something that sets her apart from the other people that this boy knows in his life. And I don't know whether that was actually the intention of the author, whether the author was trying to make a point about bodily difference, but the discussion around the eyes of this woman and the way that she looks certainly implied to me that she might have some kind of bodily difference. So I think that would have been a really interesting thing to take sort of a bit further, and we do kind of discuss that, but because the novel is so slight, there isn't really the space to discuss that. And as you know, if you've been watching this channel for a while, that's something that I do think needs more representation. But if you're into Japanese literature, or even if you haven't read any and you'd kind of like to explore that genre in translation, then I would recommend it, and it was certainly an easy read and, you know, fun to get through, but I just wish that it had gone that tiny bit further. Speaking of bodily difference and disability, you guys, you know my eternal struggle to find books in which I am represented, in which I find myself, in which I find any discussion at all about disability. I think I found one that, it's not a perfect book, no book is perfect, but I can tell you that this is the first time that I have truly felt myself as a disabled woman represented. By the way, I know there are a few of you that are new recently, so just to get you up to speed, I have cerebral palsy. It affects my lower limbs and my balance, and I do a lot of disability advocacy work and talk a lot about representation of disabled people and what it is to be disabled in a world that is certainly not made for disabled people. I'm like hearing my own vocal fry, and it's really annoying. Carrying on. This book is called So Lucky by Nicola Griffith, and my eternally faithful book recommender Russell recommended this book, and I listened to it on audiobook just the other month, and you guys, I really feel like it's an important book. If you want to learn more about disability, if you are disabled yourself, or if you have a friend that's disabled, or even, you know what, fuck it, you don't need to have a reason, just read it, it's really good, and I recommend it. We follow our narrator, who has just divorced from her wife, and she has been seeing someone else who has moved to New Zealand. So she finds herself on her own and kind of at a crossroads in life. She's working for an AIDS foundation, so she's kind of, you know, got the social justice mindset. She cares about changing the face of public health, and suddenly she gets diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and the entire book is her grappling with this diagnosis, largely on her own. Yes, she has some communication with some people, the people she works with, and the woman she'd been seeing who's moved away. But what is it to deal with such a diagnosis and the resulting removal of independence and arrival of pain and of fear largely on your own, and in the context of, you know, the life of someone who's already an activist for a different minority, understanding that you are now part of a minority, that your body is not in your control anymore. And really that's all that the book is. It's kind of her internal battle with this thing and understanding her new identity as a disabled person and what that means for her identity as an activist as well, how her activism translates to disability activism. And towards the end of the book, it kind of turns into a bit of more of a thriller thing, where some of the people in the disability activism group that she becomes a part of, some really terrible things start happening to them, and she kind of becomes the person who's in charge of figuring out why that happens. I don't think the book needed that element. I think what spoke to me the most was kind of this internal conversation she was having with herself of who am I as a human and who am I as a disabled human, and how does that intersect, and how do my mind and body talk to each other. That stuff I feel like was on point. This is an Own Voices novel. I should have led with that. Nicola Griffith was diagnosed in the mid-90s with multiple sclerosis, so she knows what she's talking about, and she's also a lesbian, so you do sense that some of this is autobiographical as well, and that line between non-fiction and fiction feels kind of blurred, and so you really feel the visceral, you know, feeling of what it is to suddenly need help from people, and the kind of humiliation that comes with that, which is something that I have grappled with and I'm still grappling with, and the fact of being an adult who is infantilized by the people around them, because the conversation, you know, around disability still infantilizes disabled people. So there's one scene, for example, in an airport where the main character is waiting to go through security, and she just waits there for, you know, what seemed like hours, because no one is helping her through, and they just keep shouting female assist, female assist, female assist. And every time I travel that happens to me, and every time I travel I have a bad experience, and every time I travel I tweet about it and get mad, and everyone blames it on everyone else, and it's frankly exhausting and soul-sucking. And to finally hear that, and I think listening to it as an audiobook really makes a huge difference too, to finally hear that and hear that I wasn't the only one, which obviously I knew, but to have picked up a book and really truly see that experience, it opened my heart, and yeah, I just loved it. It was great, and I can forgive that it went a little bit over dramatic sometimes, because I finally saw myself, and that's really exciting. Hey guys, so as you hear from that crazy tire screech, I decided to end the video there and do my classic bilingual book one, part 1, part 2 thing, because I went on for ages and I really wanted to tell you about that last book. So after then is when I decided to end the video. I will see you in a couple of days for part 2, which is already edited, so you'll see it soon. Love you all. Bye.